I still remember the sound of wind that night. Soft at first, then heavy, like it was carrying voices across the trees. The trail was narrow, with branches arching overhead, their silhouettes cutting strange shapes against the moon. I was alone, or at least I told myself I was. My flashlight barely cut through the fog, and the beam seemed swallowed whole each time I raised it toward the trees. That was when I saw the cabin. Old, sunken into the earth, its roof sagging like it had been waiting centuries for someone to notice it again. There was no path leading to it. No reason it should be there, yet it sat at the edge of a clearing as though it had been expecting me. The closer I walked, the colder the air became. Not the natural chill of the forest at night. This was heavier, biting, like it carried something else with it. My breath fogged in front of me, but I swear I heard another breath, slower, deeper, just behind my shoulder. The cabin door swayed open on its own, revealing nothing but dark. My light shook across the floorboards, catching glimpses of old furniture, dust, and broken glass. But then, in the corner, something shifted. That's when I realized I never should have stepped inside. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Shadows pooled beneath the tall pines, their trunks slick with damp from last night's rain. A thin fog curled along the path, clinging to my boots. I had been hiking for hours, following no trail, only the instinct that something or someone might be ahead. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin. It was a kind of stillness that presses against your ears, makes every breath feel loud. Then I saw it, a cabin, alone, tucked between the trees. Its wood dark and weathered, the kind of place that seemed forgotten by time. At first, I thought it was abandoned. The door was closed. The windows, clouded with dust, reflected only trees and fog. Yet as I approached, the door moved, slowly. A creak, almost hesitant. It opened itself. The kind of movement that is alive, deliberate. Inside, a faint glow flickered. A lantern, swinging just enough to cast the walls in pale orange light. No wind stirred. No hand guided it. I stepped closer. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. The smell of damp wood and something older, smoke, perhaps long extinguished, hung heavy. The cabin was small. The air inside was thicker, warmer, as if it had been waiting. I could feel it pressing against my skin, soft but insistent. A strange curiosity pulled me forward, but my chest tightened with unease. The lantern's light trembled across the walls. Shadows stretched long and thin. In the corner, a chair sat motionless, and yet I could feel it watching me. Waiting, I touched the doorframe. Cold, not from the outside, not natural. I glanced back at the opening. The door had swung fully inward now, and still no one was there. The quiet inside the cabin became louder than the world outside. Every breath I took sounded like it belonged to someone else. I thought I heard a faint shuffle, wood against wood, but it might have been my imagination. It might have been the floor settling. I walked slowly to the center. The lantern's flames swayed again. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching toward me, then retreating as if shy. A small crack in a window reflected the forest outside. Nothing unusual, except a faint glint of movement behind me that I didn't recognize. I froze. The door, it had moved again. Not fully, just a whisper of motion, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. An insistence, an invitation. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed to step outside into the cold fog, to feel the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. But something rooted me there. Something curious, patient, waiting. The air thickened, and the lantern dimmed for a heartbeat. Then it brightened again, casting long fingers of light across the floor. A soft groan passed through the cabin, low and almost apologetic. The door swayed slightly as though acknowledging my hesitation. I leaned closer to the lantern. It smelled faintly of oil, or maybe something burned long ago. I could see the faint fingerprints on the door handle, though no one had touched it. And the hinge, it creaked again, just a single drawn-out note like a breath. I stepped back. The glow of the lantern caught the edge of the doorway, and in that moment, I realized the cabin had been aware of me all along. It had waited. I wanted to run, but the forest outside seemed a distant dream, muffled and unreachable. The fog pressed against the windows, trying to slip inside. And the door whispered its own slow, deliberate rhythm. I don't remember leaving. I only remember the slow sway of the lantern, the smell of smoke that wasn't there, and the feeling of a door that didn't just open, it invited. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it, creaking, swaying, waiting. The morning fog clung to the forest like a damp blanket. Each tree stood as still as a statue, dripping with moisture. The cabin waited, silent, its walls darkened by moss and shadow. I had stayed near the edge of the clearing. The door remained closed this time, but the air felt different, thicker, colder. The smell of wet wood mixed with a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. I walked around to the side, and that's when I saw it. A window, cracked along one corner, its glass fogged with condensation. At first, it seemed ordinary. The reflection of the forest stared back at me. Branches, mist, the gray light of dawn. But then I moved closer, and my own reflection didn't. Instead, something else filled the space where I should have been. A figure, tall, dark, blurred at the edges. It mimicked my stance, but its head tilted slightly wrong, as if curious, testing me. Its presence wasn't loud. It didn't breathe, didn't move, but I could feel it. I stepped back, heart stuttering. The forest seemed to hold its breath too. A crow cawed somewhere far off, and the sound echoed hollow like it came from inside the cabin. The figure shifted, not with limbs, but in the way shadows bend toward the sun. I leaned closer again. Its eyes, or the absence of them, stared, empty yet watching. I touched the glass. Cold, the figure did not flinch. A gust of wind rattled the branches, shaking the cabin. The cracked pane trembled. The reflection in the window fractured, scattering the forest into shards. And still it was there. I moved around, trying to see if it appeared on another side. But every angle I took, the shadowy figure remained, always where I should have been. I felt it then, an awareness, a patient waiting, like it had always been there, behind the glass, behind me, somewhere between both. The cabin door creaked faintly. I turned. Nothing. Yet I could sense something moving just out of sight. A subtle shift in the air, the faint smell of damp earth and decay brushing my nose. I tried to blink it away. The reflection wavered, and for a second, I thought it had vanished. Then it returned, sharper now, edges more defined. Its head tilted again, a slow, deliberate movement. It mimicked my every slight adjustment, every hesitant step. I couldn't look away. My own eyes felt distant, like watching from underwater. I could hear my heart in the quiet, thud, thud, though somehow it felt shared, a soft, deliberate echo, as if it existed in more than one place. A raindrop slid down the glass. I watched it merge with others, tracing tiny rivulets, and the figure seemed to shift with them, moving subtly and possibly, bending around the glass. A hand, or what could have been a hand, pressed briefly against the pane. No finger marks appeared, yet I felt the pressure. I stepped back, the fog outside pressing closer, swirling around my boots. The forest seemed suddenly alive with quiet rustling. Branches whispered, leaves shivered, and the figure stayed, silent, patient, unmoving yet undeniably present. I wanted to run. The impulse burned hot, but my legs were lead. Every instinct to flee collided with a terrifying curiosity. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to see it clearly, but clarity was a trap. I finally tore my gaze away. When I looked back, the reflection had vanished. The glass only mirrored trees and sky once more. The crack in the pane, jagged and dull, caught a thin sliver of light, but the sense of being watched lingered, heavy, persistent, a subtle vibration in the air in my bones, in the very space where my reflection should have been. I left the cabin then, slow steps crunching on wet leaves. Every time I glanced back, I thought I saw a movement behind the glass. Or maybe it was only my imagination. Maybe it was waiting, as patient as the trees, as patient as a mist. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see it. A shadow where I should be. Silent, still, and always watching. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest remained hushed. Even the wind seemed to avoid the trees. Branches reached like thin fingers, swaying lazily but without sound. I returned to the cabin that day, drawn by curiosity I couldn't explain. The door, closed this time, felt heavier, denser than it would allow. A faint smell lingered, smoke, old and cold, mixed with damp earth. It pressed against my chest as I stepped inside. The room was quiet, too quiet. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, cutting the shadows into stripes across the floor. The air was thick, slightly warmer than the outside, carrying a faint hum that made my skin tingle. And then I saw it, a rocking chair in the far corner. It moved, slowly back and forth, like someone had just left it. But the floorboards beside it were empty. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The chair's motion was gentle, deliberate, almost patient. It creaked once, twice, a sound that lingered longer than it should have. Each sway left a hollow vibration in the wooden floor. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my voice felt trapped in my own chest. The air around the chair seemed heavier, almost alive. I took a step closer. The smell grew stronger. Smoke, old wood, something metallic. The rocking slowed as if noticing me, then stopped for a heartbeat, and then it moved again, ever so slightly, faster this time. I circled the room slowly. The chair remained in the corner, rocking, waiting. Shadows shifted along the walls, stretching toward the window, then retreating. A beam of sunlight caught a splinter in the wood, glinting sharply. I sat across from it, unable to stop myself. The hum in the air grew clearer, soft like a sigh. The chair rocked more insistently. I could feel it watching, though there was no face to see. The floorboards groaned under my weight. I tried to convince myself it was the old wood settling, but the pattern of the rocking, slow, then pause, slow again, didn't match my movements. A cold draft whispered past my ear. I looked around. Nothing, but the chair continued, rocking back and forth, almost in time with my heartbeat. I realized then it had been moving before I entered. It was waiting for me. I reached toward it, hand trembling. The wood felt cold, smooth, almost wet. For a moment, I swore I could feel a weight, as if someone invisible had been sitting there all along. I stepped back. The chair paused. Then it rocked again, faster this time. The creak of each motion echoed in the cabin, longer than it should have, layering into a quiet chorus. The air smelled faintly of burnt sugar, or perhaps it was just the smoke lingering from the lantern the day before. I tried to leave, edging toward the door. The chair's motion didn't stop, and I felt it, an awareness, a pull like gravity in reverse. The air itself seemed to resist my steps, thickening, pressing against my skin. I turned. The chair's sway had slowed, and in that moment, I could almost see a shape in the shadows, thin, hunched, watching. Not a human shape, exactly, more like a shadow pressed into the wood, mimicking the curves of the chair. I held my breath. The cabin seemed to tighten around me. Even the faint hum in the air paused. Time felt elastic, stretching unnaturally, and the rocking chair moved again, deliberately, insistently. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed for it, but I was rooted, unable to step over the threshold. I could feel it in my bones, the pull, the awareness, the patient weight of something unseen. I looked once more. The chair stopped, perfectly still, almost polite. The air grew warmer, almost inviting, and then I turned slowly and left. Outside, the forest seemed normal again. The fog drifted lazily across the clearing. The sun cut through in thin golden shafts. But when I glanced back, the cabin's windows seemed darker than they should have been, and the chair, I knew it would be waiting, always waiting. The forest was dimmer that evening. Fog settled low between the trees, curling around my boots as I approached the cabin. The air smelled of wet pine and something older, something like dust and ash mixed with damp wood. I hesitated at the door. It had closed since my last visit, but it felt heavier somehow, denser. Inside, the air pressed against my chest, soft, insistent, almost alive. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight as I stepped inside. Sunlight had long since faded, leaving the cabin in a pale gray glow. Shadows pulled in corners, thickening with the dim light. And then I heard it, A whisper, soft, almost drowned by the hum of the cabin. It came from beneath the floor, slow, deliberate, curling up through the boards. I froze. The sound wasn't words, not entirely, but it was deliberate, intended. I knelt, hand brushing the worn planks. Cold seeped through the wood. The whisper rose again. Faint syllables I couldn't catch. The vibration tickled my fingertips. Deep, almost sentient. I could feel it beneath me. A presence moving, breathing. Not wind, not the forest. Something inside. I stepped back, the cabin air tightening around me. The whisper followed, curling through the boards like smoke. It was patient, deliberate, aware of my movements. I traced the edges of the floor. No loose boards. No gap. Yet the whispers continued, soft, coaxing, curling under the soles of my boots. I imagined the weight beneath the boards. Small? Large? Human? Not human? The mind reaches for shapes in silence. And in silence, every whisper feels like a warning. A chair creaked in the corner, moving slightly as if nudged by invisible hands. The lantern flickered, throwing long, thin shadows across the walls. And still, the whisper persisted, rising, falling, curling along the floorboards. I tried to step closer. The air seemed thicker here, heavier. The whisper grew, not loud, but closer now, intimate, brushing against my ears like breath. I pressed my hand against the floor, cold, and beneath it a shiver, subtle, like something alive shifting just out of sight. I could feel the rhythm, deliberate, like a pulse, waiting, watching. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it, but my body refused. Curiosity weighed too heavy. The whisper became words, almost. I couldn't understand them, but there was meaning in the tone, a coaxing, a beckoning, a promise or a warning. I couldn't tell which. I stepped back, air shivering along my skin. The lantern's light flickered again, shadows twisting. I heard my own heartbeat echo faintly through the floor. Or maybe it wasn't mine. The whispers paused for a long moment. Silence filled the cabin, heavy, thick, watching. Then one final sigh, soft, deliberate, curling around the boards. I left the cabin slowly, each step crunching on damp leaves outside. The whisper faded, but I could feel it following me in the space just beneath my boots. A memory of sound pressed against my skin, waiting for nightfall. Even now, when the wind rustles in the trees, I hear it, soft murmurs, curling beneath the floor. A patient, deliberate presence, watching, waiting, and I know it will always be there. Night had fallen, and the forest outside the cabin was nearly swallowed by darkness. The fog lingered low, curling around tree trunks and roots, softening every sound. The air smelled of wet pine and earth, with a hint of something burned, faint and distant. I lingered near the doorway, hesitant. The cabin was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The rocking chair from before sat motionless in the corner. The whispers beneath the floor had faded into memory, leaving only the soft hum of stillness. Then I saw it. A pale light glowed from above. The loft. The glow wasn't bright enough to illuminate the room, but it was persistent, steady, an invitation. A strange warmth rose from it, brushing against the back of my neck. I climbed the narrow stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The smell grew stronger, smoke, faint and sweet, like something burned long ago and never fully went out. The air felt alive, dense, almost breathing. I reached the loft. Empty. Nothing but dust motes drifting in the pale light, settling on the floorboards. The lantern I had seen before had gone, leaving only shadows and a lingering glow. I leaned closer to the edge. The light seemed to shimmer just beyond reach, like it existed between reality and memory. A soft hum vibrated through the loft, brushing my ears, tickling my spine. The glow pulsed faintly, warm and cold at once, like a heartbeat I could not see. I stepped forward. Nothing moved, and yet the air pressed against my skin, deliberate, insistent. I noticed the smell again. Smoke, faintly charred wood, and something metallic. It made the warmth feel unnatural, like fire had touched the space long ago, but left nothing behind. I touched the floorboards. Cold, the light shifted slightly, as if acknowledging me, moving in gentle waves. A soft sigh rose from the corner, faint, deliberate, like a memory brushing against the walls. I looked around. Empty, and yet I could feel it. Something unseen had passed this way. Something that wanted to be noticed, wanted to be remembered. A sudden draft whispered past. The glow flickered. I thought I saw smoke curl faintly along the beams, twisting upward as if the loft had burned recently, though no ashes remained. The hum grew louder, almost musical, soothing and eerie at the same time. I lingered. I wanted to step closer, to understand what had been here, to touch the source of the glow, but instinct told me to pause. The warmth, the hum, the smell, it was too perfect, too deliberate, as though it had been waiting for me. And then it happened. The glow pulsed sharply, brighter for a heartbeat. The hum dropped into silence, and a chill ran down my spine, sharp, sudden, undeniable. The loft was empty, but the warmth, the light, the memory, it was gone. I stepped back. The smell lingered, sweet and smoky, fading slowly into the cold air of the cabin. I descended the stairs slowly. The shadows seemed heavier now, the floorboards whispering beneath my boots. Outside, the forest pressed against the windows, dark and indifferent. I left the loft behind, but the warmth and the glow stayed with me, lingering in the memory of the smell, in the hum that seemed to echo long after silence returned. I realized, as I stepped into the still night, that I had touched something fleeting, something that existed between wonder and regret. The light had been a promise, or perhaps a warning, and now it was gone, leaving only its memory, and the knowledge that some things are better left unseen. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the glow, the soft warmth against my skin, the hum vibrating just beneath the air. And I remember the smell, smoke, faint and sweet, lingering like a shadow I cannot shake. It waits, somewhere in the loft, waiting. The cabin was quieter than before, or maybe I had just noticed it more. The forest outside pressed against the windows, fog curling along the trunks like pale fingers. The air inside smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and something waiting. I moved slowly through the room, boots soft against the worn floorboards. The lantern in the corner flickered faintly, casting long shadows that reached like arms. Sunlight no longer touched the cabin. Night had arrived earlier than I realized. Then I saw it, a portrait, hanging crookedly on the far wall. The frame was old, carved wood with edges worn smooth. The image itself was faded, yellowed with age. A figure stared back at me. Someone I didn't recognize. But it was the eyes that were scratched out, rough lines cutting across the empty space where they should have been. I leaned closer, heart thudding softly. Drawn by curiosity I didn't want to name. Moonlight fell through a window at just the right angle, and in that pale, silver light, the eyes returned. Not fully, but enough, just enough to see them watching. The gaze was deliberate, patient, unnervingly alive. I stepped back, unsure if I had imagined it. The moon shifted, and the eyes vanished again, leaving empty sockets. The air seemed to grow heavier, colder, brushing against my neck. A faint hum vibrated to the cabin, soft, insistent, like the memory of a voice just beyond reach. I circled the portrait slowly. The shadows along the walls seemed to stretch, pulling toward the frame. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. Yet the sound was muffled, swallowed by the stillness. The eyes, they were back now, sharper, more deliberate, tracking me even as I moved. I wanted to touch it, to see if the eyes would react. The frame was smooth beneath my fingers, the canvas cold. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It pressed against me like breath. A creak from the corner. I spun. Nothing. Yet the shadows shifted, bending unnaturally. The lantern flickered again, throwing long fingers of light across the walls. The eyes returned. I tried to step away. The portrait seemed to follow, not with movement of wood or canvas, but with a presence that pressed, insistent, patient. I could feel in the air, in the space between my steps, in the beat of my own heart. A faint smell drifted from the wall, metallic, coppery, like old blood. I recoiled slightly, the hairs on my arms rising. The air seemed thicker now, almost alive, curling along my skin like smoke. I leaned closer again. The eyes shifted ever so slightly. They were not the same as before, not fully human. Empty, yet aware, patient, deliberate. I whispered to myself. No words left my mouth, only thoughts. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run into the night. But something held me there. The moonlight faded slightly, and the eyes disappeared again. I blinked, and they returned, sharper this time. I could feel their gaze crawling along my spine, down my arms, whispering along the walls. I stepped back slowly. The shadows recoiled slightly, but not completely. The cabin seemed to breathe with the portrait, as if the air itself was alive. Every corner, every creak, every flicker of light felt deliberate. I turned away finally. The room seemed normal again, though the memory of the eyes lingered. The frame tilted slightly, as if nudged by something unseen. The floorboards whispered beneath my boots, soft, deliberate, patient. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows. The forest waited. And inside, the portrait remained. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see it. The figure, the scratched-out eyes, the subtle return of a gaze that was never meant to follow. It watches, always, patient, waiting. I do not know what it wants, only that it exists beyond the wood and paint. And every time the moonlight hits the wall just so, I remember the eyes return. And I am not alone. Night had settled over the forest like a soft, heavy blanket. The fog rolled low between the tree trunks, curling along roots and rocks, damp and silent. The cabin waited in the clearing, dark and still, its windows reflecting only shadow. I lingered at the edge of the porch, boots pressing into wet leaves. The air smelled of cold earth and pine, with a faint tang I couldn't place. Something old, lingering. Every sound outside seemed muted, as if the forest itself held its breath. Then I heard it. Footsteps, heavy boots crossing the porch. Slow, deliberate, echoing faintly through the quiet night. I froze. The porch was empty. No one in sight. Yet the sound continued, step by step, moving across the boards as if someone was pacing, waiting. My chest tightened. Each step pressed against my senses, insistent, deliberate. I strained to see through the darkness. Nothing, only the fog, curling around the trees, swirling at the edge of my vision. I opened the door slowly. The hinge creaked, thin and high, like a warning, but the porch remained empty. Still, the footsteps moved. Step, 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 fading toward the edge, then returning, circling. I stepped outside. The boards were bare beneath my boots, leaves untouched, no prints. Yet the sound continued, following me, wrapping around my ankles, brushing the air like a living thing. I tried to call out, whispering a name into the night. Nothing answered. The forest remained silent, indifferent. Only the footsteps persisted. I backed toward the cabin. The air grew colder, heavier. The fog pressed closer, curling under the porch roof. Every step I took seemed to echo louder than the one before. Step, step, deliberate. I glanced over the railing. The forest stretched endlessly, shadows pooling between the trees. No figure, no movement, only the footsteps, persistent, patient, insistent. A branch snapped somewhere nearby. The sound echoed through the clearing. The footsteps paused, and then resumed, as if in response. Step, step, circling, deliberate. I pressed my hand to the doorframe. Cold, the boards beneath my fingers vibrated faintly. The hum of the night seemed to thrum through the wood, and the footsteps continued, patient, deliberate. I couldn't see them, couldn't touch them, yet I could feel the presence. Something pacing, waiting, breathing in a rhythm that matched the cold pulse in my chest. Step, 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 always moving, always just out of sight. I tried to leave, turned back into the cabin, but the sound followed me. The boards creaked under invisible weight. The air pressed against my back. The footsteps circled, waited, lingered. I leaned against the door, closing it slowly. The hinge groaned, faint, deliberate, and then silence. The porch was still, empty. I wanted to believe it had stopped, but even inside I could feel it. A weight lingering near the edges of the room. A presence just outside, patient, deliberate. I stayed inside the cabin, breath shallow. The fog drifted across the windows, curling along the glass. Outside, the forest waited, and somewhere on the porch, the footsteps continued. Even now, I can hear them. Step, 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 circling, patient, deliberate. They wait for me, always at the edge of hearing, just beyond the glass. I do not know who or what they belong to, but I know they are there, always, and I am never alone. Night pressed against the cabin walls, soft and still. The forest outside was heavy with fog, curling around the trees and roots like pale fingers. The air smelled of wet pine, dust, and something faintly metallic. I had lingered in the main room, reluctant to climb the narrow stairs. The attic had seemed quiet before, empty, dark. But something pulled me upward, patient and subtle, a curiosity I couldn't resist. The ladder groaned beneath my weight. Each rung felt older than it should, as if it had been waiting decades for someone to climb. The air grew thicker the higher I rose, carrying the faint smell of smoke, cold and sweet. At the top, the attic door was closed. Not locked, just closed. I pushed gently. It swung open with almost no resistance. And there it was, a lantern, old, brass and glass, sitting in the center of the floor. It burned with soft flame, steady, though there was no sign of oil, no wick to feed it. The glow cast long, thin shadows along the beams, flickering slightly as if breathing. I knelt to examine it. Cold metal, warm light, impossible at once. I blew gently. The flame wavered, dimmed, and reignited on its own. Softly, patiently, the attic smelled stronger now. Smoke would charred long ago, and something else, faint and alive, like hair brushing my neck. The lantern's light pulsed in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I could feel the warmth, steady and insistent, brushing against my palms. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned. Nothing. The shadows stretched longer, thinner, reaching along the rafters. The lantern swayed slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. I leaned closer. A soft hum vibrated through the attic, low and deliberate, brushing my ears. I could feel the pulse of it through the floorboards, in my hands, even beneath my skin. I touched the glass. Cold, and yet the light seemed to respond, brighter for a heartbeat, then soft again. I realized I was holding my breath. The attic seemed to tighten around me, watching, waiting. I stepped back. The lantern pulsed again, faintly deliberate. The shadows stretched, thin and curling as though alive. I thought I saw them shift toward me, subtle, patient. I could feel something moving just beyond the light's edge. A gust of wind rattled the small attic window. The lantern's flame tilted, dancing wildly, then steadied once more. And then I noticed that tiny curls of smoke drifting upward, though there was nothing burning. The smell of charred would intensified, warm and cold at once, like a memory pressed into the air. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it. But I couldn't tear my eyes from the lantern. The flame flickered again, not from air, but deliberate, almost alive, responding to me. I leaned closer, whispering in my own throat, nothing audible. The flame pulsed brighter, and the hum grew louder, resonating through the attic and my chest. And then, a sudden chill, cold, sharp, rushing along my arms and spine. The shadows shifted faster now, curling, twisting. The lantern wavered, but did not die. The hum dropped into silence, leaving only the crackle of invisible energy, something alive moving just beneath the floorboards. I stepped back, heart hammering. The warmth faded, leaving the attic cold, thick, heavy. The lantern continued to burn, impossible, untouchable. And I realized something. I was not alone. The air seemed to breathe around me, curling my hair, brushing my skin, pressing softly against my ears. I could feel in the shadows and the boards, in the soft vibration of the lantern, patient, watching, waiting. I finally climbed down the ladder, each step heavy, deliberate. The attic door closed gently behind me, though I hadn't touched it. The lantern's glow no longer visible, yet I could feel it lingering, a pulse in the air. Outside, the fog drifted lazily across the clearing. The forest was silent again, indifferent. But inside the cabin, I could still feel the warmth, the hum, the impossibility of the flame. And I knew it would be waiting, patient, ready for the next time. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel it. The soft glow, the hum, the impossible flame, burning without fuel, without reason. And I remember the chill that followed, the shadow that moved just beyond the light, and the knowledge that I was never truly alone in that attic. The cabin was quieter than ever that night. The fog outside clung low, drifting through the trees and curling along the clearing. The air smelled of damp wood, cold stone, and something faintly metallic, lingering just beneath the nose. I had explored every corner, or at least I thought I had. Every room, every floorboard, every shadow corner. And yet there remained one door. A single, plain wooden door in the far corner of the cabin. It was locked. I pressed my hand against it. Cold, though it felt older than it should. Dense, patient, heavy. Faint scratches lined the frame from the inside. Thin, deliberate, as though someone or something had clawed to escape. I tried the handle. It did not budge. I tried again. The scratches dug deeper in my mind than in the wood. Night deepened outside. The fog thickened, curling under the windows, curling into the corners of the room. The air grew heavier, almost alive. A subtle vibration hummed beneath the floorboards. Step, breath, something waiting. I leaned closer. The door seemed to exhale beneath my palm, cold air pressing against my fingers. I could feel the weight of it, patient, deliberate, like it was aware of my presence. I waited. The scratches on the frame seemed to crawl under my gaze. Faint marks, deliberate, insistently pointing toward the lock. I thought I heard a tap, low, almost polite, coming from the other side. I stepped back. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest. The hum of the cabin softened, leaving only silence and the faint, deliberate knocks. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. Or perhaps something faint. A shifting, a whisper, a breath. I could feel it through the wood. Deliberate, patient, waiting. I tried again. The handle did not move. The scratches pressed their warning into my mind. Knock, knock, knock. Not random. Insistent. Deliberate. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even the shadows along the walls became still, rigid, as if leaning closer to watch. The floorboards beneath my boots felt alive, humming faintly, vibrating in rhythm with my heartbeat. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it, but my curiosity held me frozen. The door was locked, yes, but the sound, the presence, it called to something deep inside. I touched the frame again. Cold, rough, insistent. The scratches seemed to respond, shifting beneath my fingers. A faint exhale of air brushed my skin, like breath from within the door itself. Knock, knock, knock. Closer now. Insistent, patient, almost polite. And yet it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I stepped away. The door remained. Silent, cold, insistent. I sat in the corner, watching, listening. The knock stopped. Only silence remained, thick and heavy. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath me, as though the room itself was breathing. Time stretched. Minutes or hours. I could not tell. The door remained locked. The scratches remained. And still, the presence lingered, patient, deliberate, waiting behind the wood. I tried to sleep. The cabin held me in a soft, cold embrace. The door whispered in absence. The scratches etched themselves into my mind. And though the knocks had ceased, I could still feel the rhythm of something on the other side. By dawn, the fog had lifted. The air outside smelled of wet pine and earth. Sunlight filtered faintly through the windows, cutting the shadows into thin strips along the floor. The door remained, locked, silent, and the scratches, etched deliberate, patient, remained. I left the room. I did not touch the handle again, but I could feel it, the weight behind the wood, the presence, waiting. Even now, when the wind whistles through the trees, I can hear it, a faint knock, soft, deliberate, patient, insistent, and I know it is still there. Frost had settled over the cabin windows that night, thin, delicate patterns curling along the glass, tracing the outlines of leaves, branches, and the creeping fog outside. The forest beyond was muffled, silent, as if it had been swallowed by the cold. I moved close to the window. The air inside smelled faintly with smoke and cold metal. My own breath left soft clouds and glass, mingling with the frost. I leaned closer, and that's when I saw it. Words, written across the glass in fresh, wet breath. Leave. I stepped back. The letters glistened faintly in the pale moonlight, jagged and deliberate. The air pressed against my skin, soft, insistent, almost alive. I blinked. The frost seemed to swirl slightly, curling at the edges, as if reshaping itself. I tried to trace the letters with my finger. Cold. The glass shivered beneath my touch. Faint, deliberate, patient. I turned away, thinking it must have been my imagination. But when I looked back, the words were still there. Fresh, wet, deliberate. Leave. The cabin grew colder. A draft whispered along the floorboards, curling around my ankles, brushing my neck. I could hear my own breath, soft, uneven, echoing in the stillness. And then another breath, softer, deliberate, brushing the back of my ear. I turned slowly. Nothing. The room remained empty. But the air pressed closer, thick, alive, insistent. The words on the glass seemed to pulse. Not with light, but with intention. Leave. Each letter stretched slightly, curling like smoke, shifting in rhythm with the cold that pressed into the cabin. I tried to step away. The frost cracked faintly under my boots. I could feel it crawling along the edges of the floorboards, curling around the walls. The cabin itself seemed to lean inward, soft and patient, holding me there. I moved back to the window. The words had changed slightly. New letters formed where none had been before. Now, I shivered. The air was colder, sharper, brushing my skin like fingernails. A faint hum rose from the walls, low, insistent, almost musical in its timing. The forest outside pressed against the glass, fog curling along the edges, silent and patient. I tried to breathe slowly. The words did not fade. Leave. Now. Each exhale from me mingled with the letters, as if feeding them, shaping them. I pressed my hand against the glass. Cold. The frost etched itself into my palm. And the letters, they seemed to move slightly, curling toward my fingertips, deliberate, patient. That I pulled back. The words remained, glowing faintly in the pale moonlight. The cabin seemed to contract around me. Every shadow, every corner, every floorboard hummed with attention. Waiting. I stepped away. Every instinct screamed to leave. But the door felt distant, unreachable, as if the cabin had stretched itself to hold me here. The frost curled faintly across the windows, chasing me with every step. I leaned closer one last time. The words were sharper, more insistent than ever. Leave. Now. A chill rose along my spine, crawling up my neck, curling around my chest. I left the cabin then. The forest outside was silent, fog curling along the path. But the words followed me, soft, deliberate, patient. Even now, when the wind whistles through the trees, I can feel it, the cold pressing against my skin, the frost curling along unseen glass, and the voice behind it, patient and insistent, repeating a single impossible command: leave. Always. The cabin's basement was colder than the rest of the house. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step echoing softly into the shadows. The air smelled of damp wood, earth, and something faintly metallic, lingering in the corners. A single window high on the wall let in pale moonlight. It barely illuminated the space, leaving the far corners in thick shadow. The air felt heavier here, dense, pressing against my chest, slow and patient. Then I saw it, a mirror, tall, old, framed in dark, etched with patterns I could recognize. The glass was slightly warped, edges cloudy with age. I stepped closer. At first, it reflected the basement as I knew it, shadows, floorboards, the faint moonlight. But then something shifted. The reflection changed. Not the room I stood in, but another space. A pale room, empty except for figures standing silently. Their skin was ghostly, almost translucent, eyes hollow, watching. And they were looking at me. I stepped back. The basement felt colder, the shadows deeper. The air pressed closer, insistent, curling around my neck and wrists. The figures remained in the glass, still, patient, deliberate. I leaned closer. Their faces were indistinct, blurred at the edges, but I felt their gaze sharpen, locking on me. I reached out my hand. The mirror's surface was cold, unyielding, and yet I could feel the weight of their attention pressing through it. A faint hum rose from the floorboards, soft, low, deliberate, vibrating through the walls and into my chest. The basement air thickened, curling into every corner, pressing against my skin. I moved around the mirror. The figures remained, shifting slightly, mimicking my movements in a delayed, unnatural rhythm. They were patient, deliberate, aware. I could feel them studying me, waiting. I tried to look away, but the mirror drew my gaze back, subtle, insistent. The basement shadows stretched toward it, curling along the walls, brushing my ankles. I could smell faintly decayed wood, earth, and something metallic, like old blood, lingering in the corners of the room. I whispered, softly, barely a breath. "Who are you?" No answer, only their presence, patient, deliberate, pressing from the glass. I stepped back again. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots, echoing through the basement. The hum rose slightly, vibrating in rhythm with my pulse. And the figures, they shifted again, closer now, though the mirror had not moved, watching me. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it. The stairs seemed further away than before. The air pressed tighter against my chest. The figures remained patient, deliberate, unmoving in their hollow attention. I leaned close one last time. The glass rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a stone. The figures blinked, or I thought they did. The basement grew colder, shadows stretching, curling along the beams, brushing my hair, my shoulders. I turned toward the stairs. The hum dropped into silence. The mirror reflected only the basement again. No pale figures, no hollow eyes, and yet I could feel them, lingering, patient, deliberate, behind the glass. I climbed the stairs slowly. The air in the cabin seemed thinner now, lighter, but the memory of the basement pressed against me. Every step echoed softly. The fog outside drifted to the windows, pale and patient, like it too was watching. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see them, the pale figures, standing silently in a room that does not exist, watching, patient, deliberate, and I know that the mirror waits. Somewhere in the basement, still reflecting another place, a place filled with eyes that are not mine, yet follow me. And though I am upstairs, in the warmth and safety of the main cabin, I can feel it, always watching. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and dust that evening. The fog outside pressed close, curling under the windows like slow, pale fingers. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual, warm but still, almost holding its breath. I walked toward the kitchen. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath my boots, long, hollow sounds that echoed through the quiet. The lantern on the counter flickered, throwing thin shadows across the walls. Then I saw it, the table, set for one, a plate, a knife and fork, a glass with a thin film of condensation. The food was untouched, arranged neatly, as if someone had just stepped away. I stepped closer. The smell hit me first, warm bread, herbs, something faintly metallic beneath it. The plate looked ordinary. The meat, soft and inviting, the vegetables bright against the wood. And yet, something felt wrong. I looked away briefly, then back. The food had changed. The edges of the bread darkened, the vegetables withered, blackening in seconds. The meat's surface seemed to shrink, curling, drawing inward like it was alive. I stepped back, hand trembling. The air felt heavier, pressing against my skin. A faint hum vibrated to the floorboards, slow, deliberate, insistent. The table seemed to watch me. I leaned closer. The food continued to spoil, faster now. The smell grew sharper, sour, metallic. I realized my own breath had slowed, trapped in my chest. The cabin pressing around me, still impatient. I tried to leave the room. The floorboards creaked faintly beneath my boots. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing along the walls, reaching for the table. But every glance I stole back toward the plate showed it changing, rotting, decaying as though impatiently waiting. I stepped closer again, compelled. I wanted to touch it, to stop it, to understand. But the wood beneath my fingers felt cold, heavy, deliberate. The food smell hit sharper now, sour and coppery. I could feel it in my stomach, in my chest, pressing, insistent. The plate quivered. Or maybe it was my hand trembling. Either way, the air seemed to pulse around the table, patient, deliberate. I stepped back fully. The hum and the floorboards grew, low, vibrating faintly in my chest. The lantern flickered one last time, shadows curling like smoke along the walls. The food continued to spoil faster, as if counting down a time I could not understand. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it, but the table, it seemed alive, waiting, deliberate. And in some corner of my mind, I knew I had arrived too late. I stepped out of the kitchen slowly. The cabin felt colder, heavier, pressing against my back as if the air itself remembered my hesitation. Every shadow along the walls seemed to stretch toward the table, carrying the lingering smell of rotten metal and herbs. Outside, the fog curled under trees. The forest waited, silent. Inside, the table waited too, patient, deliberate, and I could still feel it following me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see it. A single play set, perfectly arranged, perfectly still. The food rotting before me, faster than it should. The smell lingering in the air, heavy and coppery. I remember the weight pressing on my chest, the hum beneath the floorboards, the way the table seemed to watch, patient, deliberate, waiting. And I know that if I ever return, it will be set again, waiting for me, just for me. The cabin felt smaller that evening, the shadows heavier. The fog outside pressed low across the clearing, curling around roots and trunks like pale fingers. Inside, the air smelled with smoke, dust, and something faintly metallic lingering in the corners. I stepped into the bedroom. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my boots, hollow sounds that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The lantern in the corner flickered, throwing long, thin shadows along the walls. Then I saw it, a journal, resting on the bed, leather-worn, pages yellowed. No one else was in the room, yet the journal seemed deliberate, waiting. I picked it up carefully. The leather was cold, soft, and smelled faintly of smoke and wood. I opened it. The first pages were filled with neat, careful handwriting. Voices, shadows, someone who could never leave. The words curled along the page like smoke, deliberate, patient, insistent. I leaned closer. A chill brushed along my spine. Each sentence drew me in, pressing against my thoughts, curling into my mind. The handwriting became less neat, more desperate, frantic in the later pages. I could feel the weight of the cabin pressing closer. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, leaning toward the journal. A faint hum rose to the floorboards, soft, low, deliberate, vibrating in rhythm with my pulse. The words became darker. Whispers from the margins, scribbled faintly, almost unreadable. They spoke of voices in the walls, figures that moved just beyond sight, a presence that could not be escaped. Something patient, something deliberate, waiting. I turned the pages carefully. The farther I went, the colder the air grew. The room seemed smaller, heavier, pressing against my chest. The hum beneath the floorboard grew stronger, vibrating faintly in my hands. The last page stopped mid-sentence. A single line, unfinished, curling faintly like smoke along the paper. I can hear them now. A shiver ran down my spine. The shadows in the corners stretched again, moving subtly, deliberate, patient. The hum dropped into silence, leaving only the soft creak of the floorboard beneath my boots. I realized then that the journal wasn't just words. It was alive, waiting. I set it back on the bed. The pages fluttered slightly, as though breathing. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, coppery. The cabin pressed closer, insistent, deliberate. I stepped back. The lantern flickered once, throwing the shadows into long, twisting shapes across the walls. I could feel eyes, or the memory of eyes, watching me from the corners. The journal remained on the bed, waiting, patient. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it, but my fingers lingered on the edge of the leather cover. The words pressed against my mind, curling inside me, drawing me closer. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The shadows were still but not empty. Something moved just beyond sight, patient, deliberate, aware of my every motion. I stepped away, finally. The journal lay open, pages fluttering faintly in the cold, patient air. The hum beneath the floorboards returned, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat that did not belong to me. Outside, the fog rolled through the trees, soft and silent. The forest waited, indifferent. Inside, the cabin held its own attention, watching, patient, deliberate. And the journal, it waited too. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see the pages, the neat handwriting curling into desperate scrawls, the whispers in the margins, the unfinished last sentence, hanging in the air like smoke. I feel it still, the presence of something patient, deliberate, waiting, always waiting. And I know if I return, it will be there. The journal on the bed, open, watching. The cabin was quiet that morning, though the air felt heavier than usual. Fog lingered outside, curling low over the clearing, soft and patient. The scent of wet pine drifted into the windows, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that clung to the skin. I moved slowly through the rooms. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my boots, hollow, stretching in the silence. The lantern in the corner flickered faintly, casting thin shadows that curled along the walls. It started as a chill, soft, subtle, brushing along the back of my neck. I thought it was a draft from the windows, but it followed me, step by step, room by room, cold seeping along my spine, curling around my shoulders, brushing my arms. Every step I took carried it with me. It was patient, deliberate in its insistence. I paused in the hallway. The air pressed closer, thick, almost alive. I could feel it moving behind me, brushing my boots, curling along the floorboards. Every breath seemed to carry it further, winding its way along my chest and neck. The cabin seemed to shrink around me. Shadows stretched longer, pooling in corners, pressing against walls. The chill pressed harder, insistent, patient, deliberate. I could feel something just beyond sight, moving silently, unseen. I tried to ignore it, walked to the kitchen, touched the table, the wood warm under my fingers. And yet the cold followed, insistent, brushing my palms, crawling along my arms. Every movement carried it, patient, deliberate. The lantern flickered. A floorboard creaked faintly behind me. Nothing visible, yet the sensation pressed against my skin, brushing my hair, curling along my back. I moved to the bedroom. The chill rose again, sharper now, curling around my chest. The shadows stretched along the floor, thin, patient. The air seemed to hum faintly beneath my boots, vibrating softly, deliberately. I leaned closer to the window. Outside, the fog drifted silently through the trees. Inside, the cabin pressed closer, heavy, insistent. The cold was not just air. It followed, patient, deliberate, brushing every inch of skin it could reach. I tried to leave, step by step, toward the door, toward the clearing outside. But the chill pressed harder, curling along my boots, wrapping my shoulders, brushing my neck, insistent and patient. The forest beyond waited silently. The fog pressed against the windows, and still the cold followed. I paused. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath me, soft, deliberate, a rhythm not my own. The shadows seemed to lean closer, curling along the walls, following the movement of the light. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was tracked, observed, anticipated. I realized then that the cabin was not empty. Something unseen moved with me, patient, deliberate, insistent. I tried to sleep. The chill pressed against my skin, curling along my shoulders, brushing my hair. The shadows stretched across the walls, long, thin, patient. The floorboards hummed in rhythm with a heartbeat that was not mine. By morning, the fog lifted slightly. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and earth. The cabin seemed lighter, though I could still feel it. The cold that followed me, patient, deliberate, lingered in the memory of the air, in the space between the floorboards, brushing along my skin even when the sun rose. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel it. The soft chill along my spine, the brush along my arms, the curl along my shoulders, the patient, deliberate presence that follows every step, every breath. I do not know what it wants, only that it waits, always patient, always deliberate, and it will follow. Night pressed heavy against the cabin walls. The fog outside was thick, curling around the trees, soft and patient, muffling every sound. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine, dust, and something metallic, lingering just beneath the nose. I paused in the hallway. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my boots, hollow, deliberate. The shadows along the walls seemed to stretch, long and thin, reaching toward the corners like fingers. And then I saw it, a figure, tall, standing in the doorway at the far end of the hall, unmoving. Its shape was dark, almost blending with the shadows, but somehow wrong. I froze. The air pressed closer, heavy, deliberate, curling around my shoulders, brushing my hair. I could feel its presence before I saw details, patient, aware, insistent. I blinked. The longer I looked, the more it took shape. Limbs, shoulders, a faint outline of a face, pale against the dark. And the eyes, I could feel them, watching, patient, unyielding. I wanted to move, step forward, back, anywhere. But my boots fell heavy, the floorboards stretching under my weight, the air pressing in against my chest. The figure remained, unmoving. A draft whispered past my neck. The shadows along the walls stretched farther, curling, bending toward the doorway. I could smell something faintly metallic, coppery, rising from the floorboards beneath me. The figure did not move. It waited. I whispered, barely audible, "Who are you?" No answer, just the weight of it, patient, deliberate, pressing against my senses. The longer I stared, the more its shape solidified. I could see the outline of its hands, hanging loosely at its sides, its head tilted slightly, deliberate, as though observing me, studying my every heartbeat. I tried to breathe slowly. The air pressed closer with every inhale, curling around my chest, brushing my arms. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath me, vibrating in rhythm with a pulse I did not recognize. The figure remained, patient, deliberate. I took a careful step backward. The hallway stretched, shadows bending, following me. The figure did not move. Its eyes, pale, faintly glowing, followed me with a patience that pressed into my chest. A soft scrape came from the far corner of the cabin. I spun. Nothing. The shadows seemed to lean closer, curling along the walls, brushing my boots. And then I looked back. The figure had shifted slightly. Not a step, not a gesture, only awareness. Its presence filled the hallway, pressing, patient, deliberate. I could feel it crawling along the floorboards, brushing against the walls, curling along my skin. I tried to leave, step by step, toward the room at the end of the hall. But the air pressed heavier, thicker. The figure remained, watching, patient, unyielding. I pressed my hand to the doorframe nearest me, cold, though it seemed to lie beneath my fingers, vibrating faintly. The shadows stretched, reaching toward the figure, curling around it like smoke. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Step, pause, step. The air around me hummed, deliberate, insistent, and the figure waited. I blinked. For a moment, I thought it might be gone, but the shape solidified again, taller, darker, closer somehow. Its eyes, patient and deliberate, bore into me, and a shiver ran down my spine. I knew then I could not ignore it. The figure in the doorframe was not just a shadow. It was aware, patient, waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see it. Tall, still deliberate. The eyes following, unyielding. The weight of it pressing against my chest. And I know it will wait. Always patient. Always deliberate. The cabin felt heavier that night, as if it had grown taller and narrower while I wasn't looking. The fog pressed against the windows outside, low and curling, soft as a whispered warning. Inside, the air smelled of cold wood, dust, and something faintly metallic lingering in the corners. I moved slowly through the room, boots quiet on the floorboards, though each step seemed to echo farther than it should. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching thin, curling toward the center like patient fingers. The lantern flickered, its glow trembling along the walls. Then I noticed them, handprints, pressing outward from the ceiling boards above me. Fingers splayed, thin, long, deliberate. It looked as though something was trying to crawl through, to break free. I froze. The air pressed heavier against my skin. A faint hum rose from the floorboards, low, insistent, vibrating beneath my boots. I could feel it in my chest, curling along my spine, brushing my hair. I reached up tentatively. The wood was cold beneath my fingers. But the handprints, they felt alive. A faint vibration, subtle, deliberate, patient, crawling into my hands. A floorboard creaked softly behind me. I spun. Nothing. The shadows along the walls stretched, bending toward the ceiling, brushing against the edges of the light. I looked back. The handprints remained, pressing, insistent. And now, I realized they seemed to shift slightly, curling along the boards, patient, deliberate. The air grew colder. It wrapped around my shoulders, brushed along my neck, curling into my sleeves. The lantern flickered again, thin shadows twisting across the walls and ceiling. The handprints pressed outward, deliberate, patient, reaching. I stepped back. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath me. A soft, low vibration, almost a heartbeat, ran through the cabin. The handprints seemed to respond, curling, pressing, insistent. I could feel them moving above me, patient, deliberate, waiting. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it. But the cabin pressed against me, heavy, alive, insistent. The handprints remained, watching, crawling just beneath the wood, trying to reach through. I whispered softly, barely audible, words that felt foolish. "Who's there?" No answer, only the vibration beneath my boots, the cold pressing along my skin, the insistent stretch of shadows curling toward the ceiling. I pressed my palm to the boards above me again. Cold. The handprints pressed back, subtle, deliberate, patient. I could feel something crawling just beyond the wood, brushing along the ceiling joists, patient, deliberate, aware. I backed away. The shadows seemed to lean closer, curling along the walls, brushing my boots. The lantern flickered one last time, and then silence. No hum, no floorboard creak, no whisper of air, only the faint, lingering pressure along the ceiling. The handprints remained. I did not move for some time. The cabin held its breath. The fog outside drifted silently through the trees, indifferent. Inside, the ceiling waited, patient, deliberate, unmoving, but not empty. Eventually, I left the room. The handprints remained, pressing, subtle, curling along the boards. Patient, deliberate. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel them. Fingers pressing just beyond the wood, curling along the boards, reaching, waiting. The hum beneath the floorboards returns sometimes, soft and insistent, like a heartbeat that does not belong to me. And I know that they will wait, always patient, always deliberate. And I am never truly alone beneath the ceiling of that cabin. The cabin was quiet that evening, almost unnaturally so. Fog curled outside the windows, pale and patient, settling low across the clearing. The air smelled faintly of pine and old wood, with a trace of something sweeter, almost like faint linen left to mildew. I stepped into the bedroom at the far end of the hall. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my boots, hollow, deliberate, stretching across the quiet room. The lantern in the corner flickered, throwing long, thin shadows along the walls. And then I saw it, a cradle, empty, rocking slowly, gently, back and forth. No hands pushed it. No breeze stirred its motion. It moved as though someone had just stepped away, leaving it swaying with purpose. I froze. The air around me felt thicker, heavier, brushing against my skin. The shadows along the walls curled subtly, like they were leaning closer to watch. I stepped closer. The wood was cold beneath my fingers. The cradle creaked softly in rhythm with the rocking, faint, deliberate. A hum rose from the floorboards, low and soft, vibrating through my boots, through my chest. I leaned closer. The room smelled faintly of smoke and something sweet, almost like a lullaby left behind in a forgotten corner. The rocking slowed slightly as I approached, then resumed, patient and deliberate. I realized I could feel it, motion in the air, the hum beneath the floor, a presence waiting, watching. I whispered, softly, almost afraid to make a sound. The cradle rocked on, back and forth, deliberate, patient. No one there, yet I could feel the weight of someone or something, just beyond the walls, curled into the shadows. I tried to step back. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, echoing faintly. The air seemed colder now, pressing against my shoulders, curling along my neck. The rocking continued. Slow, steady, patient. I looked around the room. The shadows seemed thicker here, pressing along the edges, curling closer to the cradle. The faint hum from beneath the boards rose again, low, deliberate, vibrating through my chest, my arms, my hair. I felt in every inch of the room, alive, patient, aware. I leaned closer again, drawn by something I could not name. The wood was cold, the air pressing heavier. The cradle moved in rhythm with my heartbeat. Or perhaps, I thought, my heartbeat moved in rhythm with it. I could feel the hum beneath the floorboards, vibrating through the room, through the air, through me. A lullaby, soft, faint, curling through the air, not from the cradle, not from any visible source. And yet it hummed along with a rocking, patient, deliberate, insistent. I tried to leave, step by step toward the hallway. The air pressed heavier with each step, curling along my skin, brushing my hair. The cradle continued to rock, back and forth, slow, patient. The hum beneath the floorboards followed me, soft, deliberate, insistent. I paused in the hallway. The lantern flickered, shadows stretching thin along the walls. The lullaby faded, but its memory lingered in the air. And the rocking, I could still feel it, soft, patient, deliberate. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it. The cradle, swaying gently in the corner, empty yet alive. The faint hum beneath the boards, the ghost of the lullaby curling in the air. I can feel it brushing my shoulders, curling along my spine, patient and deliberate. I know it waits, always patient, always deliberate. And I am never truly alone in that room. The cabin felt heavier that evening, though the lanterns flickered softly, casting thin shadows along the walls. Fog drifted outside, curling low under the trees, soft and patient, brushing along the window panes. The air smelled with smoke, dust, and something faintly metallic lingering just beneath the nose. I opened a drawer in the sideboard. It moved easily, though it would groan softly, as if warning me to stop. Inside were photographs, old photographs, sepia-toned, curling slightly at the edges. They showed strangers in the cabin, smiling, standing by the table, leaning against the walls. At first, I thought they were just old visitors. Then I noticed something subtle. In the last photograph, I recognized myself, standing there in the room, though I had never been there before. The edges of the image were blurred, shadows curling along the corners, but the figure, unmistakably me. I dropped the photograph. It fluttered back into the drawer, as if it had weight of its own. The air pressed closer around me, cold, deliberate, patient. I could feel the shadows leaning in, stretching along the walls, curling into the corners of the cabin. I picked it up again. My reflection in the glossy surface of the photograph seemed wrong. The eyes stared back at me, patient, deliberate, aware, not quite my own, something else lurking in their depth. I looked around the cabin. The floorboards hummed softly beneath my boots, low, insistent. The shadows along the walls stretched longer, bending toward the corners, patient. The photograph seemed to shift slightly, curling the drawers alive. I turned another photo. Strangers again, some smiling, some silent. The room in each photograph felt smaller, heavier, pressing inward. And always the eyes, watching, patient, deliberate. I tried to put them back in order, but each time I did, the last photograph returned to the top, the one with me in it. The figure in the image seemed closer now, sharper, as though leaning toward me from another place. I set the drawer closed slowly. The cabinet hummed faintly in response, soft, low, deliberate. The air pressed against my skin, curling along my arms, brushing my hair. I could feel it moving in the shadows, patient, deliberate, aware. I stepped back. The photograph fluttered faintly, edges curling, though no breeze stirred. The cabin felt smaller. The shadows pressed closer. And the figure in the photograph, me, but not quite me, watched. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed it. But the drawer seemed alive, patient, deliberate, waiting. The photographs hummed faintly in my memory, curling along the edges of my vision. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it. The sepia photograph. The figure, standing there, patient, deliberate. Not me, and yet me, watching from some impossible space beyond the drawer, beyond the cabin, beyond reality. I can feel it following me, in the corners of rooms, in the stretch of shadows, in the weight of the floorboards beneath my boots. The photographs are not just paper. They are presence, patient, deliberate, and I know that if I ever return, the last photograph will still be there, waiting, the figure in the drawer watching, patient, deliberate, always. The cabin felt restless that night. Fog pressed low across the clearing, curling around the trunks like slow, pale fingers. Inside, the air smelled of pine, dust, and faint smoke lingering from the lanterns. I approached the front door. It had been difficult to shut in the past, stubborn and heavy, but tonight it resisted more. Every push seemed futile. The door swung slowly back open, as though something on the other side insisted on entry. I pressed my hands against it. Cold, heavy. The hinges creaked faintly, deliberate, patient. I tried again. The door moved slightly, then swung back, almost welcoming, almost aware. The shadows in the hallway stretched toward me. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath my boots, low, insistent, deliberate. The air pressed close to my skin, curling along my arms, brushing my neck. Something waited. I stepped back, tried to let it swing shut, but it did not stay. It swung open again, slow, deliberate, patient. I could feel the weight of it pressing inward, as though the cabin itself were breathing around me. I leaned closer. The wood was cold beneath my fingers. The edges of the door seemed to ripple faintly, subtle, deliberate. I thought I heard a faint scrape, a breath against the hinges, patient, insistent. I tried to shut it once more. It moved slowly at first, then swung back open on its own. Each attempt failed. It insisted on opening. Not violently, not harshly, but with the weight of awareness, deliberate, patient. The floorboards hummed again, low and soft, vibrating through my boots, my chest. The shadows along the walls stretched, bending toward the door. Every breath pressed heavier against my skin. The cabin seemed to lean inward, surrounding me, pressing me into the doorway. I stepped away. The door swung open slowly, patient, deliberate. I could feel its presence in the air, in the shadows, in the pull of the hallway behind me. I moved to another room, hoping it would stay closed. But when I returned, it had swung open again. Slow, patient, the hinges groaned faintly, deliberate, insistent. I realized then, it did not want to be closed. It wanted me inside. The shadows in the corners stretched thinner, curling along the walls, brushing my boots. The air hummed beneath the floorboards, soft, low, deliberate. Every step I took toward the door pressed it wider. Every glance I stole in its direction made it swing more insistently. I pressed my hand against the frame, cold, though it seemed to pulse faintly beneath my palm. The door moved slightly under my touch, deliberate, patient. I could feel it breathing, alive, aware. I stepped back. The lantern flickered. The shadows stretched long across the floorboards, curling along the walls. And the door waited, patient, deliberate, insistent. I tried to leave through the back, the side, anywhere. Every door, every window seemed to shift, press, resist. The front door still swung slowly, impossibly, as though it had its own mind. Not violent, not urgent, but aware, patient, deliberate. I could feel the pull of the cabin in my chest, pressing inward, curling around my shoulders. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath me, insistent, deliberate, alive. The shadows followed, stretching, patient, and the door waited. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see it, slowly swinging open, patient, deliberate, insistent, and I know that it will not let me leave completely, that no matter how far I step away, the door will wait. It will swing, patient, deliberate, always. The cabin felt still that evening, though the air was heavier than usual. Fog pressed low against the windows, curling along the trees, soft and patient. The scent of smoke lingered faintly, mixed with the dampness of the forest outside. I walked toward the mantel. A clock hung there, old and brass, slightly tarnished. Its face was dusty, hands frozen, or so I thought at first. Then I noticed it. The second hand moved backward, slowly, deliberately, ticking against time in reverse. I leaned closer. The tick-tock filled the quiet room, soft, steady, almost hypnotic. It pressed against my chest, curling into my thoughts. With each swing, the cabin seemed to grow older, the wood darker, the shadows deeper. The lantern flickered. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath my boots. The air smelled faintly of pine, dust, and something metallic, coppery, lingering in the corners. The ticking echoed, patient, deliberate, insistent. I tried to move away, but each tick seemed to pull the cabin around me, stretching the walls, curling the shadows closer. The forest outside pressed silently against the windows, fog curling into the corners, patient. I watched the hands move backward, minutes stretching into hours, hours into days. The cabin felt older with every tick. The shadows along the floorboards deepened, curling along the walls, patient, deliberate. I touched the clock. Cold. The brass was smooth beneath my fingers, deliberate, patient. The ticking continued, pulling the air along with it, curling around my chest, brushing my hair. I leaned closer still. The hands swung backward steadily, inexorably. I could feel time itself pressing against the cabin, pressing against me. The walls seemed to thicken, the floorboards groaning softly beneath my weight. Every shadow followed me, patient, deliberate, aware. I tried to leave the room, step by step, away from the mantel. But the cabin seemed to stretch, the shadows curling along the corners, pressing, patient. Each tick pulled me back, soft and insistent. I looked around. The air felt thicker, heavier, curling along my shoulders. The fog outside pressed closer, silent, patient. And the ticking continued, backward, deliberate, inexorable. I stepped closer to the doorway. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath my boots, low, soft, deliberate. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, reaching along the walls. The cabin itself seemed aware, patient, deliberate, curling around me like it had waited for this moment. I turned to the clock again. The hands continued their backward journey, slow, precise, inexorable, and I felt the isolation settle in, curling around me, pressing into my chest, brushing my neck. Time itself seemed distant now, the past and present folding together inside the cabin. I tried to leave completely, out the door, into the fog outside. But the tick-tock followed me, patient, deliberate, echoing in the floorboards, the walls, the shadows. The cabin grew older with every step, shadows darker, walls heavier. The hands swung backward steadily, deliberately, pressing time itself against my chest. I paused in the hallway. The lantern flickered. The air pressed close along my arms, my shoulders, curling around my neck. The fog outside drifted silently under the trees. The cabin hummed with the tick-tock, low, patient, deliberate. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it. The second hand moving backward, soft, deliberate, patient, pulling the cabin, pulling the air, pulling me. Time stretches differently there, curled around shadows, thick and floorboards, slow and patient. The hands tick backward endlessly. The cabin grows older, darker, more insistent with each swing. And I know it waits. Always. Patient. Deliberate. Isolating. The fog pressed low against the cabin that night, curling around the trees, and the clearing like pale fingers. The air smelled faintly of pine, damp earth, and something metallic lingering in the corners. Inside, the cabin was still, quiet, holding its breath. I walked toward the window at the far end of the room. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my boots, hollow, deliberate. Shadows stretched in along the walls, curling subtly into the corners. And then I saw it a face, pale, pressing against the glass from outside, eyes wide, unblinking, watching, patient that I froze. The air seemed to thicken, curling around my shoulders, brushing my hair. The lantern in the corner flickered. Thin shadows twisting along the walls, I stepped closer. The face remained, still, unyielding, impossibly close, Yet no footprints marked the earth outside. Nothing stirred in the snow-damp dirt, nothing in the fog. It simply watched that I whispered softly, barely audible, "Who's there?" No answer, only the weight of it, patient, deliberate, pressing through the glass. I pressed my hand against the window. Cold, the glass vibrated faintly beneath my fingers, subtle, insistent. The face remained, pale and still, unmoving, yet fully aware. I stepped back, heart tight in my chest. The lantern flickered again, shadows curling along the walls, reaching for the corners. The fog outside drifted low, silent, indifferent, and still the stranger remained. I tried to leave the room, step by step, toward another door, but each time I glanced back, the face was there, watching, patient, deliberate. The air grew heavier, colder. It pressed against my chest, curled along my arms, brushed my hair. I could feel its attention, unwavering, insistent. Patient, I leaned closer to the window, trying to understand. The glass reflected the fog outside, the cabin interior, the shadows. But behind me, somehow, in the reflection, the stranger's eyes followed. Not quite me, but aware of me. I whispered again. The floorboards hummed softly beneath my boots, low, deliberate, vibrating along my chest. The air seemed to pulse in rhythm with a heartbeat that was not my own. The face remained patient, unyielding, pressing against the window. I wanted to look away, to pretend it was not there. But something drew my gaze back, subtle, deliberate, insistent, and I could feel it, aware of my hesitation. Patient in its observation, the fog shifted outside. Nothing moved, no footprints, only the pale face, still, patient, pressing against the glass, watching. I stepped back slowly. The lantern flickered one last time, shadows curling along the walls, stretching thin toward the window. The stranger remained, watching, patient, deliberate. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it. The pale face in the window, unblinking, unmoving, watching from somewhere beyond the glass, beyond the fog, beyond the trees. And I can feel in the corners of the cabin, in the stretch of shadows, in the cold that presses along my shoulders. I know it waits, always patient, always deliberate. And even when I am far from the window, I can feel it there, watching. The cabin was unusually still that night. The fog pressed low across the clearing, curling softly along the trunks, muffling every sound. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine, old wood, and dust, thick and patient. I moved slowly through the hallways. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath my boots, hollow and deliberate. The lantern flickered softly, throwing long, thin shadows along the walls. And then I noticed it. Silence. Not the ordinary quiet of the cabin at night, but silence so heavy, so complete, it pressed against my chest. It was the space between the walls, the pause between each creak of the floorboards. I could feel in my bones. I pressed my ear against the wall. Heartbeats, soft, deliberate, but not my own, slow, uneven, echoing faintly through the timber and plaster. Patient, aware, I stepped back. The air seemed thicker now, curling along my arms, brushing my hair. Every shadow stretched longer, pooling in the corners, patient, deliberate. I could feel the walls leaning closer, listening, waiting. I tried to move through the room, step by step, slow, careful. But the silence followed me, thickening, curling around my boots, pressing against my chest. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath me, soft and low, in rhythm with a heartbeat in the walls. I whispered softly, barely audible. No reply, only the patient, deliberate thrum beneath the plaster. Something unseen moving behind the walls, aware of my every step. I pressed my hand to the nearest wall. Cold, the plaster vibrated faintly beneath my palm, subtle, deliberate, insistent. I could feel it, crawling just beyond the boards, brushing along the back of my hand, curling around my wrist. I stepped back. The lantern flickered, shadows curling along the floorboards, stretching long and thin. The silence deepened, pressing heavier, patient, deliberate. I realized that I was not alone, not in the room, not in the walls. I moved toward the hallway. Every step echoed faintly, carried through the silence, drawing attention. The heartbeat beneath the plaster grew louder, more insistent, patient, and deliberate. I felt it move along the walls, curling toward me, following, waiting. I whispered again, more urgently. No reply. The air seemed to thicken further, curling along my shoulders, pressing into my chest. The heartbeat continued beneath the walls, low, slow, deliberate, inexorable. I paused in the hall. The lantern flickered one last time. The shadows seemed alive, reaching along the corners, patient and deliberate. The silence pressed against my ears, my skin, my chest. I could feel it crawling through the walls, patient, deliberate, aware. I tried to leave the cabin, step by step, toward the door, but the silence followed, thickening, curling along my back, brushing my hair, pressing into my lungs. The heartbeat beneath the walls hummed softly, inescapable, deliberate, and I could feel the presence in the spaces between, patient, waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it. The heartbeat in the walls. Soft, deliberate, patient. Creeping through the timber and plaster. The silence pressing close. Curling around every inch of me. I know it waits. Always patient. Always deliberate. And I am never truly alone between the walls. The cabin was quiet that evening, though the air felt thick and heavy, pressing close along my skin. Outside, the fog drifted low under the trees, curling around roots and trunks like pale fingers. The scent of pine lingered faintly, mixed with smoke from the old fireplace. I approached the hearth. Cold ashes lay in the center, pale and dusty, undisturbed. The wood around them was blackened, long since burned, leaving only the faint outline of heat and fire. I reached closer. The ashes stirred beneath my fingertips as though they remembered the flames that had once lived there. A faint scent of smoke lingered, heavy and thick, curling along my arms. But beneath it, something else, something faintly metallic, faintly human. I drew my hand back. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my boots, hollow, deliberate. The shadows along the walls stretched, curling the corners, patient and aware. The room felt colder now, pressing against my chest, curling along my shoulders, brushing my hair. I stirred the ashes slowly. A faint puff rose, swirling in the lantern light, carrying with it the scent of burned wood and faint breath. Soft, deliberate, patient. Something exhaled through the remnants of the fire, curling along the floor, pressing against my boots. I froze. The air seemed heavier, thicker, curling along my arms, pressing against my neck. The shadows leaned closer, stretching along the walls, patient, deliberate. I could feel something beneath the ashes, beneath the boards, aware of my presence. I leaned closer again. The faint breath rose with the dust, curling toward me, warm, metallic, almost alive. The floorboards hummed softly beneath my boots, low and insistent. The air seemed to vibrate with it, patient, deliberate, aware. I whispered softly, barely audible, "Who's there?" No reply, only the scent of smoke and faint breath curling through the room. The ashes shifted slightly, deliberate, patient, moving as if something beneath pressed against the surface. I tried to leave, step by step, away from the hearth. But the air pressed closer, curling along my skin, brushing my hair, pressing against my chest. The shadows followed, stretching long along the walls, patient, deliberate. And the ashes, they seemed alive, waiting. I turned back. A small puff of smoke rose again, curling along the lantern light, carrying the scent of burned wood and faint human breath. I could feel it in the corners of the room, in the stretch of shadows, pressing against the floorboards. Patient, deliberate, aware. I stepped closer once more. The ashes shifted beneath my fingertips again, curling, patient, deliberate. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath my boots, soft, low, insistent. The air wrapped around me, heavy and deliberate, brushing my arms, my shoulders, curling into my chest. I realized then that the fireplace was not just cold wood and ash. It remembered the scent, the warmth, the faint breath. It lingered, patient, deliberate, aware of me. I stepped back fully. The shadows in the corners stretched longer, curling toward the hearth. The ashes remained, pale and undisturbed, yet alive in her own subtle way. The scent of smoke and faint breath lingered, curling through the room, pressing against my skin. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can smell it, the ashes, the faint breath curling in the air, patient, deliberate, aware, the remnants of fire and memory, pressing through the cold, quiet room. I know it waits, always patient, always deliberate, and I can never truly ignore it. The cabin felt heavier that night, as if the walls had thickened while I wasn't looking. Fog curled low outside, pale and patient, drifting through the trees. The air inside smelled of pine, old wood, and faint smoke, lingering like a quiet warning. I approached the door. It was the same door I had tried before, stubborn and reluctant, but tonight it was different. Every attempt to open it led me back inside, no matter how many times I pulled, pushed, or twisted the handle. I stepped back, heart tight. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath my boots, hollow, deliberate. The lantern flickered, shadows stretching long and thin along the walls, curling into the corners. I tried again, turned the handle, pulled with every ounce of strength. The door opened, and I was still inside. A chill pressed along my spine. The air seemed heavier, thicker, curling around my shoulders, brushing my hair. The cabin pressed closer, patient, deliberate. The walls seemed aware of my every movement, following me silently. I stepped back, trying another exit. Every door, every window, every possible route led me in circles. Each time, I ended up here at the front door, swinging open slowly. Patient, deliberate. It did not want me to leave. I pressed my hands against the frame, cold, though it seemed alive beneath my fingers, humming faintly low, insistent. I could feel it pressing against my palms, patient and deliberate, aware of my every heartbeat. I whispered softly, barely audible, "I need to leave." No answer, only the press of air along my arms, the hum beneath the floorboards, soft and deliberate. The shadows in the corners stretched longer, curling toward the door. I tried to pull again. The door opened, but still led me back inside. I could feel the cabin shifting, bending subtly, as if aware of my efforts, patient, deliberate, watching. Step by step, I moved through the hallway. The lantern flickered, shadows curling along the walls, pressing against my boots. The air grew colder, heavier, curling along my shoulders, pressing against my chest. Every attempt to escape was met with the same quiet resistance. I stopped in the center of the room, heart tight, breath shallow. The door waited, swinging slowly, patient, deliberate, insistent. The floorboards hummed beneath me, soft, low, in rhythm with a pulse I could not place. The walls seemed alive, stretching inward, pressing closer, guiding me back. I tried again. Pull, twist, push. The door opened, and I was still inside. The realization pressed against me like cold stone. The cabin would not let me leave. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. The walls, the floor, the door, patient, deliberate, aware. I stepped back. The lantern flickered one last time. The shadows curled long across the floorboards, reaching toward the door, patient, deliberate. The cabin held me, pressed around me, guided me back to front, always the front. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel it. The door, patient, deliberate, always waiting. No matter how far I try to go, no matter how many times I open it, it leads me back inside. The cabin will not let me leave. I am trapped, patient, deliberate, alone. The days after I left the forest were quiet, almost deceptively so. The road stretched out in endless fields, low hills fading into pale fog. The air smelled of wet earth and frost, the faint metallic tang of lingering fear still clinging to my skin. I thought I had left it behind. The cabin, the doors that swung open on their own, the shadows that pressed close, the cold that followed my every step. I thought distance would be enough. But then I saw it, across the empty field. There it stood, the same cabin, waiting, the door slightly open, the lantern inside flickering faintly, patient and deliberate. I blinked. Surely it was impossible. The trees were gone. The forest had ended. And yet there it was, silent, waiting, I felt the wind curl around my shoulders, soft, deliberate. The shadows stretched along the ground, long and thin, pressing toward me. The air smelled faintly of pine, though no trees were near, mixed with the ever-present tang of old wood and faint smoke. I walked closer, step by careful step. The feel beneath my boots was soft, damp, insistent. The fog curled low, brushing my legs, patient and deliberate. The cabin remained, still waiting. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed it. But something slowed me. Curiosity, dread, or perhaps recognition. I had been inside before. The walls, the shadows, the floorboards, the doors. They knew me, and I knew them. I stopped at the edge of the field. The cabin seemed smaller now, yet heavier, pressing down with the weight of its patience. The door remained slightly ajar, a flicker of lantern light spilling out, curling along the wet grass. I could feel it, aware, deliberate, patient. I thought of all the nights inside, the rocking chairs, the whispers beneath the floors, the cold pressing along my spine, the footsteps that followed, the faces in the windows. All of it, every shadow, every creak, every deliberate, patient movement. I realized then that it had never been about leaving. The cabin does not exist only in the forest. It waits, patient, deliberate, anywhere. I took another step. The air pressed heavier, curling along my arms, brushing my hair, pressing against my chest. The lantern flickered inside the cabin, thin shadows stretching along the walls, reaching outward. The fog drifted closer, soft, patient, deliberate. I wanted to turn back, but my feet carried me forward, step by slow step toward the door. The field seemed endless, the fog curling around my boots, patient and insistent. The cabin remained, waiting. I reached the threshold. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open wider. Inside, the familiar smells of pine, dust, faint smoke, and something metallic pressed against my senses. Shadows pulled in the corners, stretching long and thin. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath my boots, hollow, deliberate. I paused. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows along the walls. I could feel the weight of the cabin pressing inward, patient, deliberate. And I understood then that leaving was never an option, even outside the forest, even across fields and fog and empty roads. It follows, always patient, always deliberate. I stepped inside fully. The air curled along my arms, brushed my hair, pressed against my shoulders. The floorboards hummed faintly beneath my boots. Shadows twisted in the corners, stretching toward me, aware and insistent. The cabin was alive, and I belonged here now. I sat quietly listening, the door swinging open and closed softly, the floorboards groaning with patience, the lantern flickering, shadows bending and curling, the cabin breathing. Outside, the fog drifted over the empty field, indifferent, but I could feel the presence pressing close. The patient, deliberate weight of it, the knowledge that it follows, always. Even now when I close my eyes, I can see it. The field, empty, silent, and then the cabin, waiting, the door slightly open, the lantern flickering. Patient, deliberate, I cannot escape it. I know now that it will always follow, through fields, through forests, through fog, through time itself, and I have accepted it. The cabin waits, patient, deliberate, and I am part of it now.